The stagecoach rattled to a stop, sending dust clouds billowing across Fort McDowell, Arizona. Ruby Dawson clutched her small with trembling hands, her heart hammering against her ribs as she peered through the grimy window at the rugged frontier town that would be her new home. It was 1883 and at 20 years old she had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, a man who had paid for her passage from Boston to the Arizona Territory after 3 months of correspondence. The driver opened the door with a creak. Fort McDowell, Miss, last stop. Ruby hesitated, adjusting the high collar of her dress to hide the yellowing bruises on her neck, remnants of her stepfather's farewell. Her fingers brushed against her swollen cheek, and she winced. There was no hiding that mark, nor the split in her lip. She took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and stepped down into the harsh sunlight. The heat hit her like a physical force, so different from the cool New England spring she'd left behind. Ruby squinted, scanning the small crowd that had gathered to watch the stagecoach arrival. She was looking for Clayton Keller, the cattle rancher who had advertised for a bride in the matrimonial news. In his letters, he described himself as 30 years old, established, and of decent appearance. It promised her a good home and respectful treatment, more than she'd ever had with her stepfather. A tall figure stepped forward from the crowd. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but Ruby could make out a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. He wore a faded blue shirt under a leather vest, dusty trousers, and worn boots. A gun belt hung low on his hips. "Miss Dawson." His voice was deep with a slight drawl. Ruby nodded, suddenly unable to speak. He stepped closer and she saw his eyes clearly for the first time, a piercing blue that widened with shock as he took in the bruising on her face. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Ruby lowered her gaze. "It's nothing, Mr. Keller. Used a small accident during my journey." The man's expression hardened as he gently tilted her chin up to examine her injuries. His touch was surprisingly tender for hands so rough and calloused. "Those aren't from any accident," he said, his voice low and controlled, though she could sense the anger simmering beneath. "Those are from someone's fists." Ruby tried to pull away, embarrassed. "Please, it doesn't matter now." "I'm here and it matters," he interrupted. His eyes softened as they met hers. "Those bruises you arrived with, those will be the last ones you ever have to bear. I promise you that, Miss Dawson." Ruby felt tears threatening to spill. No one had ever made such a promise to her before. "I'm Clayton Keller," he continued, taking her. "Welcome to Fort McDowell. My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. Are you ready to see your new home?" Ruby nodded, suddenly speechless at the kindness in his eyes, so different from what she had expected. Perhaps the Arizona Territory would offer her something she'd never dared hope for: safety. Clayton helped Ruby into his wagon, careful not to touch her injuries. He couldn't stop glancing at the bruises marring her delicate features. She was younger than he had expected and prettier, though, despite the marks. Her chestnut hair was partially hidden under a modest bonnet, but a few wayward curls had escaped, framing a face that, even battered, showed a quiet dignity that stirred something protective in him. "We should see Doc Miller before heading to the ranch," he said as he climbed up beside her. "That's really not necessary," Ruby protested, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I insist," Clayton said firmly, flicking the residential to set the horses in motion. "It's no trouble. Doc's office is just down the street." They rode in silence through the bustling main street. Ruby took in the wooden buildings, the saloon with its swinging doors, the general store, and the small white church at the end of the road. It was worlds away from Boston's crowded streets and brick buildings. "It's not much," Clayton said, noticing her gaze. "But it's growing. We even got a schoolhouse last year." "It looks," Ruby searched for the right word. "Free." Clayton gave her a curious look, but didn't comment. The doctor's office was a small building with a neat sign hanging outside. Clayton helped Ruby down from the wagon and escorted her inside, where an elderly man with spectacles and a kind smile greeted them. "Clay didn't expect to see you in town today." His smile faltered when he noticed Ruby. And who might this young lady be? This is Miss Ruby Dawson, Clayton explained. My mail-order bride. She just arrived on the stagecoach. The doctor's eyes widened slightly as he took in Ruby's injuries. Is she? Well, Miss Dawson, I'm Dr. Samuel Miller. Let's have a look at you. Ruby reluctantly allowed the doctor to examine her face and neck. When he asked her to remove her shawl, she hesitated, glancing at Clayton. Perhaps Mr. Keller could wait outside, she suggested softly. Clayton immediately stepped toward the door. Of course, I'll be right outside if you need anything. Once alone with the doctor, Ruby slowly removed her shawl and unbuttoned the top of her high-neck dress, revealing more bruising across her collarbone and shoulders. Doctor. Miller's expression remained professional, but his eyes reflected concern. How did this happen, Miss Dawson? My stepfather, she admitted quietly. He wasn't pleased about my decision to come west. The doctor nodded, applying a soothing salve to her visible injuries. These will heal in time. Any pain when you breathe, dizziness. Ruby shook her head. I'm stronger than I look, doctor. I believe that, he said kindly. You'd have to be to travel all this way alone. When they finished, Dr. Miller called Clayton back in. She'll be fine. The bruises will fade in a week or two. Eva given her some salve to help with the pain. Clayton nodded, his jaw tight. Thank you, Doc. What do I owe you? Not a thing. Consider it a wedding gift, the doctor said with a gentle smile at Ruby. Doc, I haven't heard any announcement about a ceremony. Clayton cleared his throat. We haven't discussed the details yet. Well, Reverend Phillips usually conducts services on Sundays, but I'm sure he'd be available sooner if you asked. Ruby felt heat rise to her cheeks. The reality of her situation suddenly crashed down upon her. She was expected to marry this stranger, this undeniably handsome, but completely unknown man, possibly within days. Thank you for your help, Doctor, she managed to say. Outside, Clayton helped her back into the wagon. He thought we might stop at the general store before heading to the ranch. You might need some supplies. I don't have much money, Ruby admitted, embarrassed. Don't worry about that, Clayton said simply. You're my responsibility now. The word responsibility stung slightly. Is that all she was to him? Ruby wondered. At the general store, a plump woman with graying hair greeted them warmly. Clayton Keller, haven't seen you in weeks. Her curious gaze fell on Ruby. Mrs. Bennett, this is Miss Ruby Dawson, Clayton said. Ruby, this is Martha Bennett. She and her husband run the best store in the territory. Oh my, Mrs. Bennett said, noticing Ruby's injuries, but tactfully not mentioning them. Welcome to Fort McDowell, dear. Are you visiting family? Miss Dawson has come to be my wife, Clayton explained, his voice, matter of fact, but not unkind. Mrs. Bennett's eyebrows shot up. Well, that's wonderful news. We'd all given up hope of you ever settling down. Clayton's ears reined slightly. We'll need some things for Miss Dawson. Practical items for ranch life. Mrs. Bennett helped Ruby select appropriate clothing, sundries, and necessities. Ruby caught fragments of their quiet conversation. Those bruises, Mrs. Bennett began, apt before she got here, Clayton interrupted firmly. And won't be happening again. Ruby pretended not to hear, but his words warmed her heart. Perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be the cold transaction she had feared. When they finished shopping, Clayton loaded their purchases into the wagon. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower in the sky as they headed out of town. It's about an hour to the ranch, Clayton explained. Are you hungry? We could have stopped for a meal in town, but the food at Molly's cafe isn't much to speak of. I'm fine, Ruby assured him, though in truth she hadn't eaten since early morning. Clayton seemed to sense her lie. He reached behind the seat and produced a cloth-wrapped package. He brought some bread and cheese just in case, and there's a canteen of water. Ruby accepted the simple meal gratefully. As they traveled, the town gave way to open country, vast expanses of rugged terrain dotted with cacti and scrub brush, with mountains rising in the distance. "It's beautiful," Ruby said softly. "Different from anything I've seen before." Clayton glanced at her. "It can be harsh, but there's something honest about it. The land doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." They fell into a comfortable silence as the wagon rumbled along the rugged trail. Ruby found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. His profile was strong, his gaze steady on the horizon. There was a solidity to him that made her feel strangely safe despite barely knowing him. "Mr. Keller," she began hesitantly. "Clayton," he corrected. "Or Clay, if you prefer. Seems odd for my wife to call me Mr. Keller." "I'm not your wife yet," Ruby pointed out. A slight smile tugged at his lips. "Fair enough. What were you going to say?" Ruby took a deep breath. "I wanted to thank you for your kindness today and for not asking too many questions." "There'll be time enough for questions," he said. "But I want you to know something, Miss Dawson." "Ruby," she interrupted. "If I'm to call you Clayton, then you should call me Ruby." Nodded. "Ruby. I want you to know that whatever happened before, whatever drove you to answer an advertisement from a stranger in a newspaper, it's in the past now. I meant what I said earlier. No one will hurt you here." "Why did you advertise for a bride?" Ruby asked suddenly. "A man like you. Man, you seem capable and not unpleasant to look at." She blushed furiously at her own boldness. Clayton's laugh was unexpected, a deep, rich sound that transformed his serious face. "Not unpleasant to look at. That might be the most lukewarm compliment I've ever received." Ruby couldn't help smiling, though it hurt her split lip. "He didn't mean to offend." "No offense taken," he assured her, his expression growing more serious. "As for why I advertised, there aren't many unmarried women in these parts. I've built a good ranch, a good home, but it's empty. He wanted someone to share it with." He paused. "He should warn you, though, ranch life isn't easy. Especially for someone used to city comforts." "I wasn't raised with many comforts, Mr. Clayton," Ruby said quietly. "And I'm not afraid of hard work," he nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. "We'll be home soon." As the sun began to set, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Ruby caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The ranch was nestled in a small valley, with a sturdy two-story house built of stone and timber. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and a corral held several horses. It wasn't grand, but it was well maintained and far more substantial than Ruby had expected. "This is all yours?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Ours now," Clayton corrected.